The snow still bore the tracks of tires when Melissa Hartman left the small convenience store in Waukesha, Wisconsin, on that December night in 2002. The winter night carried a biting cold as the wind from Lake Pewaukee swept into the town of over 64,000 residents. At 9:30 p.m., her coworkers last saw Melissa step out into the parking lot, wearing a dark green sweater and clutching her purse tightly against her side. She opened the door of her old sedan, a car her father often maintained himself in the garage. The store manager, peering through the fogged-up glass, saw Melissa's silhouette gradually blend into the snowy night, her headlights dimming before disappearing behind a row of trees. What happened in the hours that followed would haunt Waukesha for nearly 2 decades. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. The winter of 2002 blanketed Waukesha, Wisconsin in a chilling white, with snow so thick that the small street seemed swallowed by silence. The dim yellow streetlights cast a faint glow on the icy, slippery pavement, reflecting the biting gusts of wind that whipped through the bare trees. Inside a convenience store on the outskirts, the evening shift had just ended. Melissa Hartman, a 23-year-old recent college graduate, working part-time to save for her future plans, threw on a heavy coat. She adjusted her scarf, said goodbye to her coworkers, and pushed open the glass door, which rattled lightly in the wind, stepping out into the dimly lit parking lot. Her old blue sedan, a faithful companion since her college days, waited for her. At 9:30 p.m., Melissa slid into the driver's seat, her hands trembling slightly from the cold as she started the engine, its rumbling noise fading into the thick white fog. The car's silhouette gradually vanished at the snow-covered street corner, marking the last moment anyone saw her. When the clock in the Hartman home struck 10 p.m., Patricia, Melissa's mother, began to feel uneasy. Her daughter usually called to say she'd made it home, but this time the house phone remained silent. Patricia picked up the receiver and dialed repeatedly, the endless ringing echoing through the warm but increasingly anxious household. John, Melissa's father, also tried calling her cell phone. Instead of her familiar voice, they were met with the cold response of a voicemail message. They reassured themselves that perhaps Melissa had stopped by a friend's house or her car had a minor issue, but the unease spread quickly, each passing minute stretching into eternity. The wind howled outside, pelting snow against the windows, as if reminding them that the frigid night was erasing all traces. By 11 p.m., Patricia paced the living room, clutching a notebook with her daughter's friends' phone numbers, but every call was met with silence. John stared at the wall clock, its ticking second hand pounding in rhythm with his tightening chest. When the clock struck 11:45 p.m., John didn't hesitate any longer. He picked up the phone and called the Waukesha police, his voice trembling. "My daughter is missing. We haven't been able to reach her for hours." In their small home, amidst the biting cold of the Wisconsin winter, fear began to settle, seeping into every corner. Yet deep down they clung to the fragile hope that Melissa was just running late. They couldn't yet fathom that this call would unleash a nightmare that would haunt their family and community for 2 decades. The police received the report that night, but the heavy snowfall, deserted streets, and icy roads made immediate action impossible. All they could do was log the information and assure the family that a large-scale search would begin the next morning. John and Patricia Hartman stayed awake all night, their eyes glued to the window, hoping to see their daughter's old sedan appear at the end of the street. But outside, only the cold darkness loomed. And when the first faint light of the winter morning broke through the gray sky, the largest search effort in Waukesha's history officially began. At the police station, officers gathered around a large table covered with maps. The routes Melissa typically took were marked in red ink, with dangerous intersections or isolated areas highlighted. The police chief stood before the team, his voice stern. "Every minute that passes is a lost opportunity. We must find Melissa before it's too late." Immediately, the K-9 unit was deployed, with trained dogs brought to the scene alongside their handlers. The dogs sniffed Melissa's sweater and scarf, left behind in her room, before pulling their leashes, leading the team along the snow-covered roads toward Kettle Moraine State Forest. In the sky, the sound of helicopter rotors roared, casting beams of light that swept across the forest. The headlights sliced through the snowy haze, cutting across the gray silhouettes of trees. Pilots reported over the radio, no unusual movement detected, continuing to scan the northern area. On the ground, groups of officers combed through bushes, ravines, and frozen ponds. They meticulously documented every clue, from a faint tire skid to unfamiliar footprints etched in the snow. News of Melissa's disappearance spread quickly. Local TV stations interrupted regular broadcasts to air urgent reports, displaying images of the 23-year-old with brown hair, a youthful smile, and her convenience store uniform on every screen. A bold red IMSING banner appeared alongside a hotline number. The townspeople, accustomed to the quiet rhythm of their small community, began to feel uneasy. Many families locked their doors earlier and warned their children not to go out alone. Fear gradually enveloped the community. At the same time, a wave of public support erupted. Within a day, dozens of volunteers gathered at the local church. Chosen as the coordination center, they brought flashlights, walking sticks, thick coats, and some even arrived with snowmobiles and ATVs to assist in rugged areas. Hastily printed posters of Melissa's face were passed around, plastered on utility poles, bulletin boards, and store windows. An elderly woman, while taping a poster to a grocery store door, sighed, "If this could happen to Melissa, are any of us safe anymore?" By afternoon, the search grew more urgent. Small groups were assigned tasks. One team scoured the highway leading toward Milwaukee. Another fanned out along dirt roads deep into the forest, and a third followed the frozen banks of the Fox River. Flashlights flickered in the darkness, the name Melissa echoing through the silent forest, interspersed with the barking of canine dogs. The Hartman family joined the effort directly. John carried an enlarged photo of his daughter, mounted on cardboard, clutching it tightly as he walked with the group. Each time someone glanced at the picture, he whispered, "This is my daughter. Please help me find her." Patricia followed behind, holding the scarf Melissa had worn the previous winter, pressing it to her cheek as if to capture a trace of warmth. Her eyes were red from crying, but she kept moving forward, calling her daughter's name into the bitter wind. The police and volunteers beside them remained silent, their eyes reflecting determination. As night fell, the snow grew heavier, burying even the faintest traces. The search teams regrouped, reporting their findings in a heavy silence. No clear evidence, no solid leads. Still, no one gave up. "Tomorrow we'll expand the search radius," the police chief declared, his voice firm despite his weary face. The people of Waukesha understood that this was only the beginning of a long journey. In those early days, Melissa's disappearance wasn't just a family tragedy, it became a shared obsession, sowing anxiety throughout the once peaceful community. Doors were locked earlier, wary glances followed strangers, but from that fear, a collective strength emerged. People came together, flashlights in hand, eyes fixed on the darkness, searching for a girl the town now saw as a daughter or sister. A fragile hope flickered amidst the freezing winter, but panic also grew, creeping into whispered conversations. If Melissa could vanish on a familiar road, are any of us safe? On the morning of the third day after Melissa's disappearance, as faint sunlight barely pierced the thick snow, a group of volunteer searchers, alongside police, turned onto a narrow dirt road leading east into Kettle Moraine Forest. The winding trail was marked with old tire tracks and chaotic footprints, but then one of the leaders raised a hand to halt the group. Amid the cold white snow, under the dark canopy of trees, stood a mud-streaked blue sedan. Everyone froze for a moment before rushing forward. As described in the report, it was unmistakably Melissa Hartman's car. The police were called immediately, and a perimeter was hastily set up. but the presence of curious onlookers caused chaos. Before the area could be secured, dozens of footprints trampled the snow around the car, erasing potential clues. Yet the details inside the sedan told an unusual story. The doors were unlocked, the keys still in the ignition. The front seat was neatly adjusted, showing no signs of a struggle. On the passenger seat, Melissa's purse was placed tidily, its zipper closed with her wallet and the cash from her last shift untouched. Not a single bill was missing. This quickly ruled out robbery as a motive. When the car door was opened, a musty smell wafted out. Officers noted that the radio was still on, emitting a faint static hum, though the battery was nearly drained. A seemingly trivial detail sparked unease among the investigators. Why would Melissa leave the radio on and abandon her car in the middle of the forest? Or had someone staged the scene to mislead them? Forensic technicians began photographing every detail. The ignition showed no scratches. The steering wheel had no blood or signs of violence, and the floor was dry. The snow around the tires was disturbed, but it was unclear whether it was from the car's arrival or the crowd's interference. An officer pointed to the back seat, where a few melting snowflakes left streaky watermarks, suggesting the car doors had been opened multiple times in the snowy conditions. The news spread instantly. Local reporters crowded outside the perimeter, their cameras zooming in on the blue sedan, as if it were tangible proof of a nightmare unfolding. The townspeople buzzed with talk at coffee shops, supermarkets, and churches. If it wasn't robbery, who took Melissa into the forest? Did she leave the car willingly, or was she forced? The unease deepened when the police announced that the case was no longer treated as a simple missing persons report, but had officially become a criminal investigation. In a brief press conference that afternoon, the police chief admitted, finding Melissa's car marks a turning point. We're treating this as a criminal case, and all possibilities are on the table. His face bore the strain of sleepless nights, his eyes bloodshot. The Hartman family, present at the scene, was on the verge of collapse. Patricia crumpled when she saw the familiar scarf hanging on the driver's seat. John stood firm, holding his wife's hand, trying to stay composed in front of the cameras. Meanwhile, investigators poured their efforts into the surrounding area. They staked out the site, strung up tape, and dug through the snow for additional tire tracks, unfamiliar footprints, or any discarded items. But their efforts seemed to vanish into thin air. Every step taken by volunteers had inadvertently destroyed the pristine snow, erasing the chance to trace the path of whoever brought the car here. A young officer muttered under his breath, his voice lost in the biting wind, "We've lost our best clues." That night, the red and blue lights of police vehicles reflected off the icy ground, transforming the edge of Kettle Moraine Forest into a surreal scene, both vivid and chillingly desolate. Townspeople gathered at a distance, whispering in fear that an unseen hand was lurking and a dark secret had just begun to unravel, centered on the silent blue sedan in the snow. From that moment, Waukesha was no longer just a peaceful town. Melissa Hartman's story had transcended a missing persons case, becoming a mystery that shook the entire community. The investigators knew their battle was not only to find a girl, but to uncover the traces of a crime slowly coming into view. The sedan was sealed off through the night, and by the next morning, forensic technicians began their detailed work. Wearing protective suits and gloves, they carefully opened each door, and immediately, the first major issue became apparent. The steering wheel, gearshift, and dashboard were covered in overlapping fingerprints. It was nearly impossible to distinguish which belonged to Melissa, the police, or the curious volunteers who had touched the car the previous night. The lead investigator frowned, noting the fingerprint evidence is almost completely contaminated. Still, they patiently collected samples and photographed every surface for the record. In the back seat, another detail caught their attention. On the dark fabric upholstery, 3 long, tangled hairs clung together, as if forcefully pulled. A technician carefully picked them up with tweezers and sealed them in an evidence bag. No one was certain whether they belonged to Melissa or a stranger. But in a case this vague, any piece of evidence could be the key. Stepping outside, they examined the area around the car. The snow had covered nearly everything, but patches of mud still held faint shoe prints. The prints were unclear, but differed from the boots worn by the police. This led investigators to note the possibility that an outsider had been present before the authorities arrived. Additionally, a few broken branches, crushed as if struck forcefully, were found nearby. One investigator looked up and said quietly, "It's as if someone struggled or was dragged away." The atmosphere grew heavy. Then, amidst the cold white snow, a bright red object caught their attention, causing everyone to pause. It was a cheap red plastic bracelet, lying between two faint shoe prints. It didn't match Melissa's style. She preferred delicate jewelry, not something so inexpensive. The bracelet was collected, sealed, and the team agreed it might have fallen during a struggle. However, alongside these clues was a major mistake no one dared mention aloud. The area around the car hadn't been secured immediately upon discovery. The previous night, dozens of volunteers, reporters, and curious onlookers had swarmed the site, trampling the initial evidence. New footprints overlapped older ones, and broken branches could have been caused by either a suspect or a searcher. A young officer whispered to a colleague, "We may have lost our best chance." The words hung in the frigid air, unanswered but understood by all. In the end-of-day report, the investigation team noted that the scene had been heavily contaminated, rendering many potential clues scientifically useless. However, the hairs, the red bracelet, and the faint shoe prints were deemed three critical pieces of evidence to be sent to the state lab for analysis. The police chief, upon receiving the report, only nodded, his eyes betraying deep concern. He knew that from this moment, the Melissa Hartman case was no longer just a mysterious disappearance, but a full-fledged criminal investigation, with too many questions and too few solid answers. With each misstep in handling the scene, the path to the truth grew ever more treacherous. The red bracelet, the hairs on the back seat, and the faint shoe prints convinced the police that Melissa's disappearance was not voluntary. But to turn these scattered clues into a concrete lead, they needed a witness. Just one day after the sedan was found, a middle-aged woman called the hotline, claiming that on the night Melissa vanished, she saw her standing outside the convenience store, seemingly arguing heatedly with an unfamiliar man. She remembered the scene vividly because it was rare to see Melissa raise her voice, and the man's tone was sharp and irritated. The witness's description was vague: tall, wearing a dark coat, possibly a stranger passing through, or someone Melissa knew. The police immediately began narrowing down her close contacts, and the name Kevin Doyle, Melissa's ex-boyfriend, quickly surfaced. Kevin and Melissa had broken up just a few months before her disappearance. Friends said their relationship hadn't always been smooth, with public arguments on occasion. So when news of a dispute that night emerged, Kevin became the first person of interest. That afternoon, a team of detectives knocked on the door of his apartment on the outskirts of Waukesha. Kevin greeted them with surprise, but also a clear defensiveness. In the interrogation room, under the harsh fluorescent lights, his youthful face remained resolute as he denied involvement. "I didn't see Melissa that night. I was at home, alone." When asked if anyone could corroborate his alibi, he shrugged, saying he watched TV late and then went to bed. That alibi was too vague. There were no surveillance cameras in the apartment complex, and no neighbors saw Kevin that night. His phone records were equally inconclusive. A few miscellaneous calls, but nothing to confirm he was home all night. The police pressed harder on the past relationship, mentioning previous arguments and even rumors that Kevin had been jealous when Melissa started seeing someone new. Kevin responded with prolonged silences, occasionally clenching his fists, then repeating his assertion, "I didn't do anything to her." Meanwhile, public sentiment grew increasingly heated. Headlines like "Ex-boyfriend under suspicion" divided the community. Some believed Kevin was guilty, while others thought the police were hastily pinning a name to calm the public. The police chief's press conferences grew tenser, with reporters firing questions. If it's not Kevin, then who? If you don't make an arrest soon, how can you ensure the safety of other young women? These unanswered questions put the investigators in an increasingly difficult position. After 3 days of interrogation and surveillance, the police had to admit there wasn't enough evidence to charge Kevin Doyle. He was released, but his name and image were already tied to the disappearance in the public's eyes. For the Hartman family, Kevin's suspicion only added to the chaos. They wanted to believe in justice, but feared the police were on the wrong track. In internal meetings, a veteran officer sighed, "We need more than a vague witness and a failed romance. Otherwise, we're just chasing our tails." Still, the case had crossed a new threshold, from the plastic bracelet in the snow to the ex-boyfriend under scrutiny. Every detail confirmed Melissa hadn't simply vanished. But as the police hit a dead end with their first suspect, pressure from the community and media continued to mount, forcing them to find a new direction before public trust completely collapsed. After Kevin Doyle's release, the atmosphere at the Waukesha Police Department grew heavy. In the second-floor meeting room, tense voices echoed relentlessly. Some younger investigators questioned bluntly, "We mishandled the crime scene terribly. That night, we should have secured it immediately, instead of letting a crowd trample the area around the car." Another added, "Not only that, the fingerprints in the car are useless now. We can't tell whose are whose." The police chief sat at the head of the table, silent, hands clasped, his sunken eyes betraying sleepless nights. He knew the accusations were true, but admitting them to the press was another matter. In the days that followed, the situation grew even messier when the evidence management team discovered that some samples collected at the scene had gone missing during transfer to storage. Specifically, a sealed plastic bag containing a muddy fabric scrap was unaccounted for in the log. Simultaneously, a small box holding a cigarette butt, found near the car, was reported lost. Evidence once thought invaluable had vanished without a trace. A veteran staffer muttered in despair, "We've lost our golden opportunity, and there's nothing to make up for it." The news quickly leaked, like a spark igniting a dry pile of straw. The Wisconsin press pounced. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel ran a bold front-page headline, "Police Lose Golden Opportunity in Melissa Hartman Disappearance." The article dissected every mistake: the failure to secure the crime scene promptly, the missing evidence, the release of the primary suspect without solid proof. One passage read, "If the Waukesha police had followed protocol from the start, the Hartman family might have had answers sooner, instead of being left in grief and doubt." Public outrage erupted. On morning radio shows, hosts fielded calls from listeners, some angry, others disappointed, and many expressing fear that the local justice system had failed to protect a young woman. The Hartman family, already exhausted by anxiety, exploded with fury. Patricia, the mother, didn't hold back tears in her first press interview. "My daughter deserved to be protected, to be searched for with every resource. Instead, they let the crime scene get ruined and evidence disappear. How can I trust they'll find Melissa?" John, the father, was more stoic, his voice trembling with anger. "If the police didn't do their job right from the start, everything we're doing now is just chasing shadows. I don't want apologies. I want answers." The family's anger resonated with the community. Dozens gathered outside the police station, holding posters of Melissa and chanting for justice. One mother in the crowd told a reporter, "If this happened to my child, I'd want to know why the police were so careless." Political pressure quickly bore down on the police chief and investigators. City officials were forced to hold an emergency meeting to explain, but their justifications sounded hollow against a family's pain. Within the department, tensions grew. Some veteran investigators argued there was no point dwelling on past mistakes and that the focus should be on new leads. Others insisted on reviewing every detail of the original scene, even if it was too late. Late-night arguments exposed a hard truth: The lack of unity was slowing the investigation. A young detective left a meeting, whispering to a colleague, "We're not just losing Melissa, we're losing the community's trust." The investigative errors pushed the case into a dead end. Melissa Hartman remained missing, with no truly solid leads, and the story shifted to focus on mistakes, outrage, and helplessness. In Wisconsin's cold snow, the hope of finding her seemed thinner than ever, and each passing day raised more questions. Could justice still reach the Hartman family, or was everything forever buried with the lost evidence? After days of turmoil over the investigative mishaps, the Hartman family became the focal point of both pain and media attention. In their small suburban Waukesha home, Patricia Hartman refused to let anyone enter Melissa's bedroom. The bedsheet remained neatly folded, as it was the day her daughter left for her evening shift, with music posters and friend photos still haphazardly hung on the walls. On the desk, a ceramic mug held traces of tea from that morning. Patricia often sat at the threshold, eyes brimming with tears, whispering, "I won't change a thing until you come back." Every detail in the room became a piece of memory, and she clung to them as the only way to hold on to Melissa. John Hartman was no different. He kept the old landline phone in the living room, rarely used since the family got cell phones. Every night, he sat silently beside it, ears perked for any ring, hoping for Melissa's familiar voice, "Dad, it's me." Many times, when the phone rang with a wrong number or telemarketer, John still picked it up trembling, his heart pounding. The cycle of anticipation and disappointment became a daily torment. In their desperation, the couple agreed to appear on a local evening news program. On camera, Patricia clutched her daughter's photo, her voice breaking. "If anyone out there knows what happened, please tell us. My daughter is a good girl. She doesn't deserve this." John, beside her, added, "We just want Melissa back, no matter what condition she's in. Please help us." The image of the aging, weary couple, their eyes still flickering with hope, moved the entire community. Soon after, a makeshift memorial was set up outside the convenience store where Melissa worked. Residents brought fresh flowers, candles, and handwritten prayers. A child left a small teddy bear beside her photo, whispering, "Please come home, sister." Each night, as the cold set in, the candles burned faintly, their flames trembling in the wind, but never fully extinguishing. The site became a spiritual anchor for the Hartman family, and the town, a symbol of the belief that Melissa was still out there, waiting to be found. Yet behind the outpouring of sympathy lay an undeniable reality. Trust in the police had plummeted. Residents quietly whispered that the authorities had failed from the start, and without community pressure, Melissa's case might have been forgotten. For the Hartmans, the neighbors' support was a comfort, but also a painful reminder that justice was slipping away. Patricia spent nights staring at the TV, replaying her interview, sobbing at her own hollow eyes. John slumped by the phone, gripping the receiver as if holding it tightly enough could make Melissa call. In that heavy atmosphere, the Hartman home became a symbol of waiting and suffering, a sealed bedroom no one dared touch, an old landline ringing in vain, and two exhausted people clinging to fleeting hope. Waukesha, once a peaceful town, now bore a shared wound. Melissa's disappearance didn't just steal a daughter from a family, it stole safety from the community. As the candles burned outside the store in the snowy night, they weren't just prayers for a girl but a collective sigh from a town sinking into despair. Time moved faster than the pain could fade. Throughout the winter and into the spring of 2003, the Waukesha police chased every trickle of a lead, but all led to dead ends. No new witnesses emerged. The faint shoe prints, the red plastic bracelet, and the hairs from the back seat were tested but yielded vague results. No matches in the state's DNA database. Repeated interrogations of Kevin Doyle followed the same script. He denied everything, and the police lacked evidence to charge him. Public outrage, once boiling, simmered down to weary sighs and a lingering fear that gripped the community. The convenience store where Melissa worked still lit up each night, but since the memorial was erected out front, Passers-by lowered their heads in silence. By August 2003, after nearly a year of dead ends, the Waukesha police made a painful decision. Melissa Hartman's case was officially classified as a cold case. Internally, the decision came after tense meetings. A young detective protested, "She's too young, her family's still waiting. We can't give up." But a senior officer shook his head. "It's not giving up, it's a lack of manpower and budget. We have other cases to prioritize." The police chief, silent through the meeting, concluded tersely, "This case will wait until we have new technology or information." Those words shut the final door on hope. The day the case was archived, the evidence storage room in the police station's basement opened. Plastic bags and numbered cartons were neatly arranged on cold metal shelves. Among them were the bag with 3 hairs, the red plastic bracelet, some mud samples, and a worn notebook from the scene. All were placed in a box labeled Case #2002 Hartman and stored in a dark corner. The iron door closed, the lock clicking shut, as if sealing all clues into endless darkness. An investigator, making a final note, sighed, "This might be the last time we touch this evidence." For the Hartman family, the news was a knife to the heart. Patricia collapsed in tears when told the case was no longer a priority. She shouted at a press conference, "My daughter isn't just a file to be closed. She's my flesh and blood." John sat motionless, his trembling hands clutching Melissa's scarf, his eyes red but tearless. Inside, anger and helplessness fused into a heavy weight. Neither could believe that, in less than a year, their daughter had been relegated to an unsolvable case by the justice system. The media continued reporting, but with less intensity. Wisconsin's major papers gave only brief mentions to the case's cold status, overshadowed by other news. On TV, anchors read quick lines before moving to sports. For the public, initial fear gave way to indifference, as if the case had faded. But for the Hartmans, each day was torment. Patricia refused to clean Melissa's room, even adding flowers to her desk. John kept waiting for the phone to ring, knowing it was a delusion. The Waukesha community felt the void too. The memorial outside the store remained, but the candles and flowers dwindled. Those who once searched occasionally stopped by, leaving a flower before quietly leaving. The unease lingered, mixed with helplessness. A neighbor whispered to a reporter, "We hoped, we tried, but maybe Melissa is gone forever." From then on, the Melissa Hartman case entered a frozen state. No more search teams, no police at the scene, just dusty files and evidence in storage. Each time John and Patricia passed the station, they thought of that basement room where their daughter's fate was confined to a cardboard box. The pain was indescribable, but they had no choice but to wait. Wait for technology to advance, or a new witness to emerge. Wait, even if it took a lifetime. After the Melissa Hartman case was classified as a cold case in August 2003, time flowed like a cold river, sweeping everything into oblivion. From 2004 to 2017, the case barely surfaced in press conferences or Wisconsin's front pages. The detectives who once worked tirelessly moved to other cases, and Melissa's name faded into the background, a sad memory few wanted to revisit. Her file sat silently in the basement storage, the numbered cartons gathering dust, opened only once a year for routine inventory before being returned to their dark corner. Yet, for the Waukesha community, the memory didn't entirely vanish. Each year, on the anniversary of Melissa's disappearance, residents gathered outside the convenience store where she worked to light candles and pray. At first, hundreds attended, TV cameras crowded, and candlelight formed a glowing sea in the winter night. Over the years, the crowd shrank to dozens, then a small group that persisted. They brought flowers, Melissa's photos, and the red bracelet found near her car, now a symbol tied to her name. Locals called it the Red Bracelet Vigil, a ritual with no clear origin, but it became part of the collective memory, a silent promise that Melissa would never be fully forgotten. Over that decade and a half, the Hartman family aged rapidly, as if time bore down on their shoulders. Patricia, The mother, her hair white by her early 50s, her eyes sunken from sleeplessness and tears. She kept Melissa's room untouched, refusing entry. The worn bedsheet was carefully washed and replaced as it was. The dusty desk held her daughter's books and diary neatly arranged. Once, a reporter visited, and she pointed to a wooden chair by the window, whispering, "She sat there every morning, drinking tea and writing. I want everything the same when she comes back." John, the father, was worn down by the years too. He grew quieter, often sitting for hours by the old landline. Though cell phones had taken over, he kept the house number hoping Melissa would call. When the phone rang, usually a telemarketer or wrong number, he answered quickly, voice trembling. "Melissa, is that you?" The repeated disappointment became a scar on his soul. Friends said John aged a decade in a few years, his back hunched, his face gaunt. The community carried a vague obsession. For families with daughters, Melissa's name was a reminder of safety's fragility. Parents warned their children not to go out alone at night, to distrust strangers, and to always carry a phone. Melissa became a cautionary symbol, but also a name people hesitated to mention, as if it might reopen a wound. At vigils, the red bracelet was placed at the memorial center, beside Melissa's photo. It was no longer just vague evidence, but a symbol of the case. Wearing a similar red bracelet signaled that justice remained undone. A neighborhood girl once asked her mother, "Why do people light candles for Melissa?" The mother replied, "Because we never found her, and we don't want to forget." Despite this persistence, reality was harsh. The case languished in silence, constrained by the era's technological limits and waning investigative resolve. The Hartmans' pain didn't heal, only buried under time's dust. They aged in endless waiting, living between memory and fragile hope. For Patricia and John, each morning brought the question, "Will someone call today? Is there news?" Each night ended with the same answer, nothing. By late 2017, as Christmas lights blanketed the town, Melissa's room remained untouched. The landline sat in the living room corner, and the red bracelet glowed amid dozens of candles at the vigil. A decade of silence had deepened the pain, and the question, "Where is Melissa?" lingered unanswered. In early 2018, as winter snow blanketed Waukesha again, a statement from the county sheriff's office sparked new hope for families haunted by unresolved cases. Waukesha County established the Cold Case Unit, a small but dedicated team tasked with reviewing long-dormant files. The press release stated, "We believe that with modern technology and renewed determination, cases once thought hopeless can find answers." For those who had agonized for over a decade and a half, it wasn't just administrative news, it was a promise. And at the top of the first list on the table was Melissa Hartman's name, a wound that had never healed. The Hartman file was brought out during a meeting in a small third-floor conference room. The yellowed cartons, labeled Case #2002 Hartman, were carried to the table. When opened, dust rose, as if a buried era had come alive. The new investigators, many unfamiliar with the 2002 case, examined each evidence bag with a mix of curiosity and duty. A young officer remarked, "There are still the hairs, the fabric sample, never analyzed with modern tech. Evidence once deemed worthless, now held potential, as after 15 years, DNA and forensic technology had entered a new era." The hairs from the car's back seat, the red plastic bracelet, and the muddy fabric scrap were revisited as overlooked links. In 2002, the CODIS database was limited, and unmatched samples led to dead ends. Now, with whole genome sequencing and genetic genealogy, a single hair could trace an entire family tree to a specific suspect. The Cold Case Unit investigators sat around the table, flipping through faded reports. They read blurred ink, contaminated scene, unclear evidence, vague alibi. One shook his head. They did their best with what they had back then. Now it's our turn to start over. The new county sheriff, who had followed advancements in forensic technology for years, spoke with resolute conviction. "We owe the Hartman family an answer. Not just because it's our professional duty, but because it's the right thing to do. He ordered a complete inventory of the evidence, with every item, no matter how small, to be re-examined. The sealed bags were sent to the state lab, and then forwarded to Othram Inc. in Texas, a facility renowned for analyzing highly degraded DNA samples. Simultaneously, the investigation team decided to start from scratch on the human element. They revisited the entire list of old witnesses, calling each one, many of whom had since moved away. Kevin Doyle's interrogation transcripts, the ex-boyfriend, were reread and cross-referenced with phone records and new data. Though no longer considered the sole suspect, they wanted to ensure no detail was overlooked. A veteran detective remarked, "The point isn't to re-accuse Kevin, but to understand what Melissa went through in her final hours." The Hartman family wept when they learned the case was reopened. Patricia, her hair now white, said in a small interview, "I've waited for this day for so long. If someone out there knows the truth, please speak up. But if not, I hope science can do what people couldn't." John, sitting quietly beside his wife, only nodded, his trembling hand resting on his daughter's old scarf, his eyes glinting with a spark of hope after years of despair. Reopening the Melissa Hartman case was more than an administrative procedure. It was like a bell ringing through Waukesha after over 15 years of silence. The memorial outside the convenience store, which had seen fewer visitors over time, now bloomed with fresh flowers and newly lit candles. Townspeople whispered to each other, "Maybe this time we'll find out what happened." The long wait was reignited with fragile hope. Justice, though delayed, might still find its way back. The sealed bags labeled Case #2002 Hartman were transported in specialized containers with cold storage from the Waukesha Police Evidence Room to Othram Inc.'s state-of-the-art lab in the Woodlands, Texas. The most anticipated item was the few hairs found on the back seat of the sedan all those years ago. In 2002, those hairs were merely noted, briefly compared to the CODIS database, and then shelved as inconclusive. Now, with whole genome sequencing, even a rootless, degraded hair could hold a genetic map capable of tracing an entire lineage. Othram's technicians, in sterile suits within a dust-free room, began extracting DNA. Under microscopes and million-dollar analyzers, faint DNA fragments were amplified, pieced together, and gradually reconstructed into a complete genetic profile. When the results appeared on the screen, the team of technicians sighed in relief. Despite significant degradation, they successfully reconstructed over 700,000 genetic markers, more than enough to enter into a genealogy database. An expert told the police via video call, "This is the first time the Hartman case has a complete genetic profile. From here, we can find distant relatives." The news reached Waukesha, and for the investigators who revived the case, it was like a beam of light piercing through nearly 2 decades of ice. The data was uploaded to GED Match and other commercial genealogy databases, where millions of Americans had voluntarily submitted their DNA to trace family origins. Within days, the system flagged initial names, some Kellers, some Brants, all scattered across Minnesota. None matched CODIS or had criminal records, but the genetic distance suggested they were distant relatives, perhaps 4th or 5th cousins, of the DNA sample from Melissa's car. The Waukesha police contacted a genetic genealogist who had worked on numerous cold cases. She spread massive family tree charts across a table, connecting names and relationships from civil records, birth certificates, marriages, and cemeteries. Day by day, the family tree grew to hundreds, then thousands of names. The process was like navigating a maze, but connections began to converge on Wisconsin. Among the branches, one name appeared with increasing frequency: Thomas Keller, born in 1974, residing in Waukesha. When the investigators heard this name, the room's atmosphere grew thick. Keller wasn't unfamiliar. He had a minor local police record, not major felonies, but enough to raise eyebrows, a few domestic violence reports, a bar fight, and a DUI arrest. No convictions had landed him in prison, but he always lingered in the law's gray areas, clever enough to avoid serious punishment. What stunned the police most was the proximity. In the early 2000s, Keller worked at an auto repair shop just a few blocks from the convenience store where Melissa worked. Employment records noted that in 2002, Keller took an extended leave of absence coinciding with Melissa's disappearance. When the genealogist pinned Keller's photo to the board, linking it to the Minnesota DNA, a collective sigh filled the room. He's been right here all these 16 years. The investigators began reviewing old data. A witness had reported seeing Melissa arguing with a man outside the store that fateful night. At the time, the police assumed it might be Kevin Doyle, but when Keller's photo was placed beside the witness's vague sketch, the resemblance sent chills through the team. Nothing was certain, but the investigation was clearly shifting. The genealogy team dug deeper. They confirmed Keller was closely related to the Minnesota DNA matches, with genetic ties narrowing from fifth cousins to fourth, then directly to Keller's parents. The connection was undeniable. The hair from Melissa's car carried Keller's bloodline. In internal meetings, the cold case unit's whiteboard became covered with Keller's name. Below Melissa's pinned photo in the center, a bold red arrow pointed to his portrait. The lead investigator tapped it, saying tersely, "This is our direction. This is who we're watching." The room fell silent, save for the squeak of a marker. They began scrutinizing Keller's past behavior. Police records showed that in 2001, his wife called 911, reporting he choked her during an argument, though she later dropped the charges. In 2004, a neighbor reported Keller's suspicious behavior, often watching women in the neighborhood, but lack of evidence halted action. Pieced together, these details painted a picture of a man with latent violent tendencies, prone to losing control, and particularly dangerous to young women. Late nights in the office, investigators sat before stacks of files, fluorescent lights casting shadows on tired faces, but their eyes burned with determination. A young detective blurted out, "If we'd known about Keller from the start, things might have been different." An older colleague shook his head. "The technology wasn't there then, now he can't escape." The Hartman family was informed of the new lead. Patricia clutched her daughter's photo, crying and whispering, "I always believed someone knew. We just hadn't found them. Now we have a name." John, beside his wife, gripped her hand, his eyes glinting with hope, mixed with suppressed anger pent up for 16 years. For the Waukesha community, the news remained confidential, but within the police, the atmosphere shifted palpably. After over a decade and a half in the cold, the Melissa Hartman case had a real suspect, and that name, Thomas Keller, was no longer just a genealogical data point, but a flesh-and-blood person living among them, walking the streets they thought were safe. When Thomas Keller's name emerged from the genealogy data, no one in the cold case unit doubted they were on the right track. But justice couldn't rely on genealogy alone. They needed direct evidence, a current DNA sample from Keller, to compare with the hair from Melissa's car. So, in early 2019, a covert surveillance plan was launched. Detectives, dressed in plain clothes, drove unmarked civilian cars, blending into neighborhoods or parking lots near Keller's home and workplace. Keller, then 45, maintained a deceptively normal appearance. He lived in a modest Waukesha suburb with his wife and 2 children. Neighbors described him as quiet, goes to his night shift at the machine shop, comes home on time, doesn't cause trouble. This very normalcy heightened the police's caution. The best hidden predators blend in seamlessly. Each day, detectives meticulously logged his routine. Keller drove a gray pickup to work at 7 a.m., stopped at a local coffee shop for a large to-go cup. At noon, he smoked outside the parking lot, flicking ash to the ground. Evenings, he parked in his garage and disappeared behind his door. Their goal was clear: obtain Keller's DNA legally from items he discarded in public. One March morning, as Keller left his usual coffee shop, he tossed a paper cup with lip residue into a trash can outside. A detective, disguised as a passerby, swiftly retrieved it, placing it in a prepared evidence bag. Another day, while Keller chatted with coworkers outside the shop, he smoked 2 cigarettes in a row, tossing the glowing butts to the ground and crushing them. After he walked away, an undercover officer approached, gloved hand quietly collecting the stubs into a sealed bag. These simple actions made hearts race, as they knew this could be the case's defining moment. The cup and cigarette butts were rushed to the lab. The team waited, the air heavy with anticipation. Those days, their phones were on speaker, waiting for the lab's call. Finally, one April afternoon, the long-awaited call came. The lab technician's voice crackled urgently. The DNA on the coffee cup and cigarette butts matches the hair from Melissa Hartman's car perfectly. No doubt about it. The meeting room fell silent for a few seconds, followed by sighs, nods, and even some teary eyes. After 17 years, they had undeniable scientific proof. Thomas Keller was the one who left DNA in Melissa's car, present at the scene the night she vanished. The news was kept confidential, known only to a small group in the cold case unit and county leadership. But the silence was heavy, and even the detectives struggled to stay calm. They saw Keller still walking freely on familiar streets, sipping coffee each morning, chatting with neighbors, while the Hartman family aged daily in grief. A young investigator exclaimed, "It's unbearable to see him live so normally. But at least now we have the truth." With the DNA match, the Melissa Hartman case entered a new phase. No longer speculation or genealogical theory. This was an absolute match, the strongest evidence they'd ever had. In a weekend meeting, the county sheriff stood and declared firmly, "We've found the man who destroyed Melissa's life. From now on, every step we take must be precise, because we cannot let justice slip away again." In that brightly lit room, Melissa's old photos were hung again, the red bracelet placed on the table as a reminder. After 17 years, the investigation circle had closed around Thomas Keller. Now, their remaining task was to turn that scientific truth into justice in court, so the Hartman family could finally hear the answer they'd awaited for nearly 2 decades. In the weeks following the DNA match to Thomas Keller, the cold case unit resolved to go further, find Melissa's remains to close the investigation circle. A closed-door meeting was held, with a map of the Pewaukee Lake area, miles from where Melissa's car was found, spread across the table. Based on genealogy data, Keller's habits in the early 2000s, and old work logs from the auto shop, investigators noted Keller frequented a deserted plot near the lake's north shore, where an abandoned lumber storage shed stood. If he wanted to hide a body, that's the perfect spot, a detective noted, and all nodded in agreement. On the excavation day, the sky was overcast, with icy winds blowing from the lake. The search team, detectives, forensic experts, and K-9 units gathered at the site's edge. A small excavator was present, but used sparingly to avoid damaging potential remains. Initially, experts used shovels and trowels, carefully scraping the soil. A K-9 dog, after minutes of sniffing, stopped at a raised mound covered in weeds, barking incessantly. The team immediately focused their digging there. After a few layers of soil, a distinct musty odor emerged. Everyone paused, donned masks, and continued. Tattered, dark fabric scraps surfaced from the cold, damp earth. Then, a long grayish-white bone appeared. No one spoke, only rapid breaths filled the thick air. When a forensic expert lifted it, everyone knew they had found what the Hartman family had waited 17 years for, though no one wanted to face this truth. The excavation lasted all day. Each bone fragment, fabric scrap, and small item was documented, photographed, numbered, and placed in evidence bags. A chilling detail emerged. Near the skull, buried in the soil, a faded red glint appeared. When retrieved, it was a red plastic bracelet, broken in two, its plastic discolored but still recognizable. Everyone recalled the red bracelet found near the sedan in 2002. Now, another appeared beside the remains. "No doubt, this is evidence of a final struggle," a detective whispered. That evening, the Milwaukee coroner's office received all the evidence. Examination began that night. The bone structure and estimated height matched Melissa. DNA from the bones, compared to Patricia Hartman's blood sample, confirmed a perfect match. The official report stated, The remains excavated near Pewaukee Lake are those of Melissa Hartman, missing since December 2002. When the news reached the cold case unit, no one could speak. Many who had worked the case from the start sat silently, eyes welling up. A veteran investigator whispered, "Finally, she's coming home." The Hartman family was called to the station to hear the news. In the room, Patricia sat motionless, her hands clenched white. Upon hearing confirmed, she collapsed onto the table, sobbing, while John sat silently, eyes blurred, his voice hoarse. "At least now we know where our daughter is." Word of the remains spread through Waukesha within hours. Residents gathered outside the convenience store where Melissa worked, adding flowers, candles, and red bracelets. Local TV aired a special, calling it the bitter closure of a nearly two-decade case. For the community, it was proof that truth, no matter how long buried, could resurface. In the forensic team's final report, one line was underlined: Melissa Hartman's death resulted from violent human action. Scene evidence and DNA directly linked to Thomas Keller. These words transformed the case from suspicion to undeniable certainty. Justice, after so many years, had taken shape. From here, no room remained for vague theories. Melissa was dead, and the man responsible was Thomas Keller. When the forensic report confirmed the remains near Pewaukee Lake as Melissa Hartman's, the atmosphere in the cold case unit's office was leaden. A veteran detective, part of the case from the beginning, set the report down and whispered, 17 years, we finally know. The grim news was delivered to the Hartman family in a private meeting. No press, no cameras. Patricia sat at the table's head, her weary eyes tracking the investigator's every move. Upon hearing officially confirmed, she broke into sobs, collapsing into John's shoulder. He, with a haggard, aged face, shed no tears, only gripped his wife's trembling hand and said in a raspy voice, "At least now we know where our daughter is." For them, the truth was both a release and a deeper wound. Just hours later, the news spread across Wisconsin. Media outlets blared headlines. Red bracelet case, Melissa Hartman's remains found after 17 years. The name Red Bracelet Case stemmed from the red plastic bracelet found at the scene in 2002, and now another appeared beside her remains. That image became an enduring symbol of the case, evoking the vigils held over a decade. Evening news broadcasts replayed old footage, Waukesha's community lighting candles, the memorial outside the convenience store, and the aged faces of Melissa's parents pleading for justice. Now screens showed evidence bags from Pewaukee Lake, with police lights flashing red and blue across the silent water. Waukesha was shaken. In a small downtown cafe, everyone was talking. One woman told a reporter, "We've lived with this question for 17 years. Now the answer's here, but it hurts more than we imagined." At Melissa's old high school, a memorial board was set up, with students taping notes, "You're not forgotten." On social media, posts with #Red Bracelet spread, as Wisconsinites shared memories of the disappearance that haunted them in the early 2000s. For the Hartman family, the media attention was a double-edged sword. They wanted Melissa remembered, but not their private pain dissected again. Patricia declined camera appearances, issuing a brief statement, "We know our daughter has come back to us. Please give us time to grieve and prepare for what lies ahead." John, in a rare moment, agreed to speak to a local reporter. He looked into the camera, voice trembling but firm. "Justice is still out there, and we'll see it through to the end." In the days that followed, the memorial outside the convenience store glowed again. Hundreds brought red bracelets, candles, and flowers. Some, strangers to Melissa, whispered prayers, "You've finally been found, girl." The somber yet united atmosphere led many to compare this case to other infamous Wisconsin tragedies, stories etched into collective memory. Amid the grief, a wave of anger surged. People questioned why it took 17 years for answers. The media revisited early mistakes, the contaminated crime scene, lost evidence, police delays. One paper wrote, "Without advanced DNA technology, the truth might have stayed buried forever." Those words cut deeper into the already fragile trust in local law enforcement. Yet, amid the chaos, one truth was undeniable. Waukesha finally had closure, however painful. Melissa Hartman was no longer just a face on faded posters or a name echoed at vigils. She had returned, in the form of bones, a reminder that justice, though delayed, was never entirely lost. And now, with Thomas Keller's name emerging clearly in the investigation, the town braced for the next chapter, one where pain would turn into a seismic reckoning as the killer faced exposure. On a cool September morning in 2019, Waukesha's air felt heavier than usual. On the quiet street, where Thomas Keller had lived for years, neighbors were used to seeing him sweep his yard early, greet them warmly, or share baked goods. But that day, instead of coffee's faint aroma, they heard loud banging on his door and police shouting, "Waukesha County Sheriff, open the door now." The red brick house, usually silent, became the focal point of a months-long covert operation. The door was forced open, heavy footsteps echoing. Moments later, Thomas Keller appeared on the doorstep, face pale, hands locked in cold handcuffs. Neighbors spilled out, stunned. "No way," a woman whispered, clutching her coat. To them, Keller was a mild-mannered 58-year-old, a former carpenter who sometimes fixed fences for free. Yet before their eyes, he was dragged away like a dangerous criminal. An elderly man shakily filmed with his phone, while kids caught a glimpse before their mothers pulled them inside. The scene quickly became a hot topic on local social media, with images of Keller in a rumpled shirt, hair disheveled, head bowed as he was pushed into a police car, spreading like wildfire. For the investigators, this moment was the culmination of over a year of silent surveillance. After DNA from Keller's discarded coffee cup and cigarette butts matched the sample from Melissa's car, they knew it was time to act. The task force had planned meticulously, leaving Keller no chance to flee or destroy evidence. Inside his home, they seized items, a hunting knife, a box of rope, and chillingly, an old journal with fragmented entries about the young girl at the convenience store in 2002. Investigators read it with chills, as the tone was cold, describing a person like an object. As Keller was led to the car, he glanced around, his eyes briefly defiant before dropping. Neighbors stepped back, some crying. They couldn't believe the man who walked his dog in the park, chatted about the weather, could have killed Melissa Hartman. "We lived next to a monster all these years and never knew," a neighbor told a reporter, voice trembling. At the station, the first interrogation unfolded under harsh lights. Keller stayed silent, demanding a lawyer, but that silence only thickened the tension. An investigator placed a photo of the red bracelet found near Melissa's remains before him. Keller glanced at it, then quickly looked away, lips pressed tight. To the police, that was enough. He knew more than anyone about that bracelet's origin. Meanwhile, news of the arrest spread like fire. Wisconsin media blared, "Red bracelet case, suspect arrested." Local TV broadcast live footage of the police car leaving the neighborhood, with dozens of residents lining the street, faces mixing shock and relief. They had lived in the case's shadow for 17 years, now that shadow took the form of a real person. The Hartman family was notified after the operation. Patricia couldn't hold back tears upon hearing Keller was arrested. "I've prayed for years, and today I believe Melissa guided us," she said in a brief press conference. John, voice hoarse, added, "Justice is just beginning." Waukesha wasn't just shocked, it was furious. People questioned how someone like Keller, with a history of domestic violence, lived unnoticed among them. Many wore red bracelets, vowing to follow the case to its end. Online, posts and comments questioned the justice system while sharing memories of Melissa. The investigators knew a long road lay ahead, building a watertight case, finding more evidence, facing a defense attorney sure to fight fiercely. But for the community, Keller's handcuffing outside his home was a historic turning point. It transformed the case from a vague obsession into stark reality. The man who took Melissa Hartman's life was facing justice. That moment, the clink of handcuffs, the neighbors' stunned gazes, the Hartmans' choked sobs, etched itself into Waukesha's memory. From here, Wisconsin prepared for a trial that could reshape the community's faith in justice, one no one wanted to miss. At the Waukesha County Courthouse, Thomas Keller's indictment hearing drew crowds of reporters and residents. After 17 years of waiting, the Hartman family sat in the front row, clutching red bracelets, the case's symbol, as a vow to persevere. Chief Prosecutor Margaret Fulton stepped to the podium, her voice clear but heavy with history's weight. She laid out the evidence painstakingly gathered over a year of reinvestigation. First was the DNA from Keller's discarded coffee cup and cigarette butts, a perfect match to the hair and tissue trace found in Melissa's car in 2002. Fulton held up the documents, emphasizing, "This is the thread linking past to present. It shows the person in that sedan was none other than Thomas Keller." Next, she presented images of the red plastic bracelet found beside Melissa's remains at Pewaukee Lake, matching the one discovered near the scene in 2002. Displayed side by side on a large courtroom screen, they made some spectators gasp. "These aren't just pieces of plastic," Fulton said, "but symbols of a final struggle, marks Melissa left resisting her killer." She also cited the witness who saw Melissa arguing with a man near the store the night she vanished. Though memory had faded, the witness insisted the man's build and gait matched Keller's. Each detail wove a clear picture: a snowy winter night, Melissa leaving work, meeting Keller, being forced and disappearing. But as Fulton finished, Keller's defense attorney, Charles Dwyer, stood, voice sharp. "Your Honor, all the prosecution's evidence is circumstantial. It doesn't directly prove my client is a murderer." He stressed that DNA could have multiple explanations. "The match only proves my client was near the car, not that he caused her death." On the red bracelets, Dwyer called them coincidental, cheap trinkets sold at any store in America. As for the witness, he argued, a memory from nearly 2 decades ago cannot be reliable. The courtroom fell silent for a moment. The Hartman family sat stunned by the cold rebuttal. Patricia covered her face, sobbing. John stared at Keller, eyes blazing with anger and helplessness. The community split. Some felt relief that justice was unfolding. Others feared a slick defense might let the culprit slip. Fulton didn't flinch. She countered that modern DNA technology had unmatched precision, with near-zero odds of a random match. She highlighted Keller's history of domestic violence, his job near Melissa's store in 2002, and the lack of any evidence showing a legitimate reason for his presence in her car. She concluded, "We're not relying on one detail. We're relying on the convergence of many pieces, forming an undeniable truth." Still, Dwyer's presentation cast tension over the courtroom. He repeatedly told the jury no one saw the crime and that the prosecution is crafting a story, not presenting clear truth. The fierce clash turned the trial into a battleground, each side vying to shape public perception. As the session adjourned, dozens gathered outside with reporters. A middle-aged woman shouted to a camera, "We've worn red bracelets for 17 years to remember Melissa. Don't let that man escape." Others were cautious. "If it's only circumstantial, I'm worried he'll walk." Debates raged on social media, splitting the community into clear camps. In the cramped room, Keller sat motionless, his face expressionless. But that indifference chilled many. The Hartmans, prosecutors, and community shared one goal: making him pay. Yet, as Dwyer stressed, the path to a conviction was long, and the legal fight had just begun. On the opening day of Thomas Keller's trial, the Waukesha County Courthouse was packed like never before. From early morning, lines of residents stretched down the hall, many wearing red plastic bracelets, the symbol tied to Melissa Hartman for nearly 2 decades. Reporters jostled outside, cameras and lenses rolling live. The courtroom's air was thick, everyone aware this wasn't just a trial, but a confrontation between a community's painful memory and the man accused of causing it. As the judge delivered opening remarks and the jury took their seats, Chief Prosecutor Margaret Fulton stepped up. She began with a calm but weighty voice. Today you'll hear the story that began on a winter night in 2002, when a young woman named Melissa Hartman vanished on her way home. A large screen lit up with Melissa's graduation photo, her bright eyes and radiant smile. Many in the courtroom bowed their heads. Some couldn't hold back tears. Fulton guided the jury through each phase. The failed search, the car left by the forest, the contaminated scene, the case going cold, then reopened after 16 years. She ended her opening with a clear statement. 17 years later, science brought Melissa back, and justice must return with her. Next, the prosecution called a forensic expert from Othram. The middle-aged man in a neat suit, Dr. Richard Martinez, introduced himself as a geneticist specializing in criminal investigations. He showed slides, explaining to the jury, many unfamiliar with the concept, how genetic genealogy works. Unlike traditional DNA testing, which only compares samples to criminal databases, genealogy allows us to build a full genetic profile and find distant relatives in public databases. A massive family tree appeared, with over 1,000 linked names, narrowed through elimination. At the end, one name remained: Thomas Keller. Martinez stressed that the odds of a random match were virtually zero. He explained how the team collected DNA from Keller's discarded coffee cup and cigarette butts, comparing it to the sample from Melissa's car. The results matched perfectly, he said firmly, confirming Keller was at the critical crime scene. Jurors took notes, some exchanging glances, clearly swayed by modern science's power. Defense attorney Charles Dwyer immediately objected, arguing the method's legality was debated. But the judge allowed Martinez to continue, instructing the jury to weigh the evidence value in context. The prosecution deftly emphasized that it wasn't just DNA, but multiple reinforcing factors. The next witness was a gray-haired man, trembling as he took the stand. Frank Wallace introduced himself as a regular at the convenience store where Melissa worked. He recounted that on December 14, 2002, he saw a tall man near Melissa's car just before she left. I wasn't sure back then, he said, voice breaking. But years later, seeing Keller's photo in the news, I recognized his walk, the way he moved his arms. It was him. Dwyer quickly cross-examined, arguing a memory from 17 years ago was unreliable. Wallace countered, some images don't fade. That night, I remember the cold, the snow, Melissa's fleeting glance, and that man standing there. I'm not mistaken. The Hartman family sat silently, each testimony cutting deeper but sparking hope for justice. Patricia clutched the red bracelet, eyes wet. John occasionally stared at Keller, who remained impassive. Fulton closed the first day by summarizing, "We have a perfect DNA match. We have a witness's recollection. We have a timeline and location alignment, and most importantly, we have Melissa, speaking through the evidence left behind." She paused, looking at the jury. "We owe her the truth." As the judge adjourned, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters rushed out to file stories. Outside, residents gathered under streetlights, discussing the dramatic first day. Some said, "The DNA's locked him in." Others were cautious. "The defense will try to weaken it, but I believe justice will win." The first day ended, but its echoes lingered. To many, this wasn't just a case, but a battle between painful memory and final truth. The jury left, carrying images, Melissa's face, the red bracelet, the witness's trembling voice, and the complex DNA genealogy chart. They knew their task was just beginning, and justice's survival hinged on their decisions in the days ahead. On the third day, the jury and courtroom had settled into the tense rhythm. Prosecution presented, defense countered, judge reminded, but that morning, when Margaret Fulton called a new witness, the atmosphere shifted. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, petite, hands trembling, as she clutched a fabric bag. She introduced herself as Elaine Parker, 45, now living in Madison. Her voice was hoarse and halting. "I've never told this publicly, but today I know I have to." The courtroom fell silent. Elaine recounted that in fall 2001, As a nursing student, she was attacked by a stranger in her dorm parking lot. He grabbed her arm, shoving her into a dark space between cars. He gripped my shoulders, tried to cover my mouth. I fought back hard, scratching his arm with my nails, she said, choking up. Luckily, a classmate passed by, shouting my name. He ran off immediately. When Fulton asked why she didn't report it, Elaine bowed her head, eyes red. I was scared of blame, of not being believed. Honestly, I just wanted to forget. But she stressed that the man's face, especially his cold eyes and slight limp in his left leg, was etched in her memory. When Keller's arrest hit the news in 2019, she was stunned. That was the man from back then. Her words detonated like a bomb in the courtroom. Jurors exchanged glances, some nodding, others jotting notes. The prosecution seized the moment, displaying a 2001 photo of Keller matching Elaine's description. Fulton asked, "Are you certain?" Elaine's voice steadied. "I'll never forget those eyes. It was him." Defense attorney Charles Dwyer objected, calling the testimony a vague 18-year-old memory, with no police report or physical evidence. "This is emotional manipulation, not law," he said sharply. But the judge allowed the testimony, instructing the jury to assess its credibility. The Hartman family sat silently, their faces a mix of pain and hope. Patricia gripped John's hand, whispering, "If someone had spoken up sooner, maybe Melissa would still be alive." John only bowed his head, shoulders trembling. The media erupted. New witness, Keller attacked before Melissa's disappearance. On TV, legal analysts said the testimony could be a psychological turning point for the jury. They'll see this wasn't an isolated act, but a pattern of violence. In the courtroom, Elaine ended with words that chilled many. "For 18 years, I wondered why I survived, and Melissa didn't. Now I know, it's so I could stand here and tell the truth." Her words echoed, piercing the wall of silence around Keller. He sat motionless, but for the first time, his eyes flicked downward, avoiding Elaine's gaze. As the day's session ended, the hallway outside buzzed. Residents whispered, "If he did that to her, then Melissa?" Those wearing red bracelets left quietly, carrying a mix of shock and resolve. They were watching the truth unfold bit by bit. After 3 weeks of intense arguments, the Thomas Keller trial reached its climax. That morning, the Waukesha County Courthouse was packed, not a seat left. Reporters jostled to set up cameras. Locals with red bracelets lined the halls silently. Inside, the jury sat stone-faced after days of absorbing haunting evidence and testimonies. The judge stood, voice resounding. "The jury has reached a verdict." In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Patricia Hartman gripped her husband's hand, her eyes brimming with tears, while John stared at Keller, his gaze heavy with anticipation. Keller sat motionless, his face impassive, though his cuffed hands trembled slightly. When the judge addressed the jury, the foreperson stood, voice firm. "We find the defendant, Thomas Keller, guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Melissa Hartman." A roar of murmurs erupted across the courtroom. Some wept, others embraced, and the Hartman family collapsed in choked emotion. The judge pronounced the sentence, life without parole. The gavel's strike echoed, a final affirmation of a 17-year journey for justice. Patricia covered her face, sobbing, while John, after years of stoicism, shed tears. He turned to his wife, whispering, "Our daughter has justice finally." The Hartman family was invited to speak. Patricia stood, still trembling, clutching the red bracelet. Her voice broke but held firm. "Melissa was our only daughter. She deserved a long life, not to be buried in cold earth for 17 years. Today, justice came late, but it's still justice. Thank you to everyone who never gave up, so Melissa wasn't forgotten." John followed, his eyes fixed on Keller. "You took my daughter's life, but you can't take the love and memories we hold. You'll live the rest of your life behind bars, while Melissa lives forever in this community's heart." Keller remained silent. Throughout the trial, he showed little emotion. And even as the sentence was read, he only bowed his head, unresisting. His defense attorney announced an appeal, but to many, The truth was clear and irreversible. Outside the courthouse, hundreds gathered. Hearing the verdict, the crowd erupted in applause, tears, and shouts of justice for Melissa. Red bracelets were raised high in the afternoon sun, a symbol of justice's triumph over nearly 2 decades of darkness. The media dubbed it the end of the red bracelet case, a case now part of Wisconsin's collective memory. That evening, local TV aired a special, footage from 2002. The sedan abandoned by the forest, the failed search, candles at the convenience store, was followed by Keller's arrest and today's verdict. The anchor concluded, "This isn't just a sentence for a killer, but a message that truth, no matter how long buried, will rise." At St. Mary's Church, where prayers for Melissa were held years ago, a memorial service took place that night. Candles blazed, red bracelets formed a heart on the steps. Patricia and John attended, embraced by the community. A woman whispered to them, "We waited with you for 17 years. Now Melissa can rest." For Waukesha, the verdict didn't erase the pain, but brought closure. The question, "Where is Melissa?" no longer lingered, as it had an answer. The loss remained, but justice delivered a resounding full stop, affirming Melissa was never forgotten. As night fell, Melissa's room in the Hartman home remained untouched, as it had for 17 years. But for the first time, Patricia gently closed the door, not in denial but to whisper, "You can rest now." In Waukesha, the gavel's echo lingered in memory, the sound of justice, late but never silenced. After Thomas Keller's life without parole sentence, Wisconsin entered a quieter but no less critical phase, reflecting on the past 17 years. The Melissa Hartman case, or the red bracelet case, became a historic milestone not just for Waukesha, but the entire state. It wasn't merely a closed crime, but an epic of perseverance, technology's power, and hard lessons from early mistakes. Forensic experts stressed that without advances in genetic genealogy, the case might have remained in cold storage. A hair, overlooked for 16 years, once deemed useless without a root, became the key to truth. Whole genome sequencing and genealogy databases turned a hopeless case into a historic breakthrough. The Hartman case was cited at forensic conferences as a prime example of the new era of genetic justice. An officer involved said, "I learned no evidence is too small, just that our technology wasn't ready to unlock it." But alongside technology's light, the shadow of early errors loomed. The failure to secure the sedan's crime scene, letting volunteers and reporters trample evidence, was a major misstep. The loss of some samples during storage transfers eroded the Hartman family's trust for years. Without those minimal remnants, hair, fabric, red bracelet, even modern technology would have been powerless. The case was added to Wisconsin police training, emphasizing evidence preservation's critical importance. An instructor said, "Sometimes the difference between justice and oblivion lies in a properly stored evidence bag." For the community, the Hartman case taught that a cold case isn't a dead one. Many families, once hopeless, found inspiration here. Wisconsin victim support groups saw a surge in families bringing old files and photos of missing loved ones, asking, "Can we have a chance like the Hartmans?" The answer was never certain, but the case proved waiting wasn't futile. Each technological advance could open new doors. The media and community kept the red bracelet symbol alive. Once a cheap plastic trinket found in snow, it became a torch guiding a town. Red bracelets appeared at vigils, in editorials, on social media hashtags, and finally in Keller's life sentence. They stood for enduring memory and the relentless fight of a family and community. The Hartmans, after nearly 2 decades in grief, could begin healing. Patricia admitted she still couldn't enter Melissa's room without tears, but for the first time, she felt she could close the door, not in denial, but to comfort her daughter. "It's done, you can rest." John told a reporter, "I aged 10 years in pain, but today, I believe Melissa didn't die in vain. She helped give other cases a chance." For Wisconsin, the Hartman case spurred policy changes. The state allocated funds to expand the cold case unit, and improve evidence storage and digitization. A Melissa Hartman Fund was created to support genetic genealogy testing for backlog cases. Each time a family learned their case was reopened, Melissa's name was invoked as inspiration. The following winter, Waukesha held a formal memorial, no longer the small prayers of past years. At a new monument in the town's Central Park, hundreds gathered, wearing red bracelets, lighting candles, and bowing in silence. The monument read, "In memory of Melissa Hartman, justice, though delayed, has arrived." In the heavy snow, candles flickered, and a red bracelet, placed neatly on the stone, stood out against the icy white. Its glow, small but steadfast, mirrored the journey Melissa and the community endured. Darkness may linger, but justice and memory never fade. The story of Melissa Hartman in Waukesha is more than a murder case closed after 17 years. It's a profound reminder for American society today. From the initial investigation's errors, the unsecure sedan scene, overlooked red bracelet, lost samples, we see the vital importance of professionalism and responsibility in law enforcement. Without those hairs preserved in sealed bags, 2018's genetic genealogy would have been useless. The lesson is that patience and proper evidence handling can transform a case's outcome. The case also proves new technology's power. From a seemingly useless hair, investigators built a genetic profile, traced distant relatives in Minnesota, and reached Thomas Keller. This underscores the need to invest in forensic science, genealogy databases, and federal collaboration, especially with thousands of unsolved cold cases across America. Additionally, the story reflects community strength. For years, Waukesha residents lit candles and wore red bracelets to remember Melissa. Their persistence comforted the Hartmans and pressured police to reopen the case. In today's America, where trust in institutions often wavers, this story reminds citizens of their right and duty to keep victims' memories alive, ensuring justice isn't buried. Finally, the red bracelet glowing in winter snow is a symbol. Though darkness may endure, justice can arrive if we don't give up. Thank you for joining us on the journey to find justice for Melissa Hartman and hearing the haunting story of the red bracelet case. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more cold case stories, and we'll see you in the next video.